All right, so welcome back to another midweek with Double Creek. Today we are in week 45 out of our 52 weeks with Jesus from this book by James Merritt. So after today we have 7 more weeks left in this book. And if all goes as planned, we should finish up this book on Wednesday night, May the 31st. And then we'll take off the month of June for our midweeks and probably start back in July. So we've been moving right along. And today we begin a new section in this book. We've been in section 6 for the past 6 weeks. Today we begin section 7. This section is called Jesus, the Leader. I think there's only 4 weeks in this section. And I believe we're going to enjoy this section. I've enjoyed each of the sections so far, but I think this one is going to help us all a great deal when it comes to how to serve, how to lead, and how to just treat people. And what Merritt does at the beginning of each section is he opens up with a short little paragraph that kind of opens up a little introduction to that section. So I want to share the words that he writes, the paragraph to open up section 7. The title of today's lesson, though, is The Standard of Greatness. And so this is what he said as he opens up this section. Few words are batted about by managers, pastors, entrepreneurs, and politicians more than leadership. When we want to learn how to lead, we often look to those whose names emblazon book covers and fancy business cards. But what about the leader who claims more followers than any person in history? What made Jesus such a great leader? The answer has the power to transform us into people of influence and impact. And so those words right there take us and lead us into this 7th section of this book. I'm going to wait for a few minutes before we read the scripture that we're going to be focusing on today. So I want to start off by talking about what James Merritt first talks about in this chapter, which is this: who's the greatest? Now, you can think of any list out there of any kind, and people will debate about who is the greatest of all time in a certain category. And we call that person often the GOAT. G-O-A-T. Greatest of all time. So sometimes people just say he's the GOAT or she's the GOAT. And so you can get a discussion going on anytime, anywhere, any place by just asking a simple question: who's the greatest at this? But understand this: if you ask that question, the conversation can sometimes get heated. It can even turn into arguments about, just because we want to debate about who is the greatest. All you have to do is ask this question: who is the greatest blank of all time? So I want to do that here for just a bit. If I were to ask you who is the greatest basketball player of all time, who would you say it is? My dad would have told me it was Bill Russell, and we had this debate when I was growing up. I've always said it's Michael Jordan. Nobody in today's game compares to Michael Jordan in any way, in my opinion. There are people that may be as athletic, or even more so, but just as athletic as Michael Jordan was. But when it came to work ethic, when it came to that refuse to lose mentality, the mental toughness, when it came to all those other intangibles that it takes to be great, he had them all. And you don't see that in anybody else. What if I were to ask you who's the greatest baseball player of all time? It can be a tough one because you have great hitters, you have great pitchers, you have great fielders, but for most people the list might start with Babe Ruth. Be hard to disagree with that. Babe Ruth could pitch, he could hit, and he changed the game like nobody else has. He's the one who brought the long ball, brought the home run into Major League, into baseball, really. What if I asked you who is the greatest football player of all time? Most people would probably go ahead and say it's Tom Brady because he has 7 Super Bowl rings. Nobody else has matched that. What about the greatest musician of all time? And I think you could get a lot of different answers for the greatest musician of all time. Most people would probably maybe say Elvis Presley. He was nicknamed the King. They would say him for how big he was, how famous he was, the fact that maybe Elvis Presley was looked at like a Babe Ruth. He changed music. the style of music, the appearance of it, his charisma, his moves, all the stuff he did, plus he could sing. So a lot of people would just say him. What about the greatest president of all time? That would certainly bring about a big debate. A lot of people would probably say Abraham Lincoln for what he did during the days of slavery. Others might say George Washington. Somebody else may say Roosevelt or somebody else. What about the greatest golfer of all time? You know, many people today would say without a doubt the greatest golfer, the GOAT when it comes to golfing, is Tiger Woods. And they would look at the fact that he dominated for so long, his number of wins total on tour. Others would say Jack Nicklaus because without a doubt, they would say Jack Nicklaus, and the fact that he has more major wins than anybody else makes him the best. Now, Tiger probably would have broken the major record if injuries had not have happened, but we don't know. So a lot of people would come down to those two, but no matter how you look at it, whatever the list is, there's no clear way to define the GOAT, the greatest of all time in that category. And as we're going to see today, the way we would measure greatness does not line up with the way God and Jesus define or see greatness. So let's see what Jesus had to say about greatness in Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 35. In this passage, Jesus is predicting his death for a second time there with his disciples. It was one of those things that the Bible even tells us that they didn't understand what he was saying. And we're going to see here that they didn't understand it, and they were even afraid to ask him. So let's see what these verses say. Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 35. It says, they left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand what he meant, and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. So it's a very interesting passage right here that we read. And it was probably a little bit of an intense moment here during that time. We don't really get any major details or any details as to what all the disciples were saying, but Jesus makes it clear, and the scriptures make it clear to us that they were talking about who was the greatest as they traveled. They were talking about among themselves about who is the greatest among them. And Jesus shows us what Merritt calls a new measure. Think about this. How does the world measure greatness? We often think of greatness and who is the greatest by numbers, by accomplishments, don't we? Who's won the most? Who's made the most money? Who has the most followers? So on and so on. It's about who's done the most or has the most or made the most. So the people in our world who are often considered great or the greatest, or at least near the top of the list, are the ones who have a lot of things, or they've done a lot. In the world, someone is considered great because they have success in some way. Now, if that is how greatness is determined, few of us would be in that conversation for greatness, would we? For the greatest in anything, really. Now, we might look at our life, and we might consider our life to be successful. We might consider our life to even be great in some ways. But according to the way the world measures greatness, most of us would fall short in that area. So I asked how the world measures greatness. They do it by numbers, by accomplishments. How is it we measure greatness? I think for most of us, common people, we might consider it great if we have a successful business career, or if we have a great marriage, or if things go well in our life and our family, our children grow up to be great people, great leaders. Our ideas of success and greatness are a little bit different than maybe what the world thinks about success and greatness. And then God's view is totally different than what our view and the world's view would be. God's definition for greatness, the way God views greatness, is totally different from ours. Our world, and sometimes us, we'll view greatness based on what we do. But there's a big difference between doing great things and being a great person. On several occasions, Jesus kind of taught, showed his disciples and us today what greatness really is. Think about what Jesus said there at the end of the last verse, the end of the section that I read, those verses earlier. It was the end of verse 35. You'll see it right here when Jesus said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. Well, that changes a lot. It's totally different from the way we view greatness. It's totally different from the way the world views greatness. In fact, it's the exact opposite of how human beings, how we view greatness. Jesus made it clear that the secret to greatness is service. Would you say the world measures greatness by how many people you serve or by how many people serve you? I think it's clear that the world would measure greatness by how many people serve you, how many people are below you or under you. But Jesus was just the opposite, wasn't he? He measured our greatness by how many people we serve. In the eyes of Jesus, it's not about how much we get. It's about how much we give. I say it a lot here. It's on our pens. It's on our website. It's on our little sticky note papers. Love God, love people, right? The two greatest commandments. But it would be right to say this. Love God, love people, serve both. Loving is important, isn't it? It's the two greatest commandments in all the law. Love God, love others, love people. Jesus said they will know we are his disciples. How? By our love. And if we love, we're going to serve. If we love God, we're going to serve people. If we love people, we're going to serve people. There's no other way around that. And so that's why we have all these different types of committees, you could say, here at the church. It's not being bossy or to tell people that you need to get involved. It's to open up opportunities for people to get involved, to serve. Not everyone's fit to be a teacher. Not everyone's able to cook for others when they're hurting or sick. But everyone can have a servant's heart. And Jesus shows us just how important that is. But we have to have an approach. We also have to approach serving the right way. Let's put it that way. You know, I can put myself in a position to serve all day and every day, but if I don't approach serving in the right way, then maybe I'm just doing it for all the wrong reasons. In Matthew chapter 20, there's a story where the mother of the sons of Zebedee comes up to Jesus, and she has a request to Jesus for her sons. Do you remember what that was? In Matthew 20, verse 21, this is what we read. And he said to her, Jesus asked her, what do you want? And she said to him, he probably didn't say it quite like that. He just said, what do you want? And she said to him, say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. Now, how do you think Jesus was feeling or thinking? What do you think he was thinking about at that exact moment when she does this? She's basically asking Jesus, listen, I want you to place my sons at the top, above everyone else. This is exactly the opposite of what Jesus has been teaching, of what his ministry has been about. But if we're honest, are they much different than us in some ways? Is that request much different in some ways than what we want? In our world, we learn at a very young age, especially in school, to be first in things. Be first in line. Look out for yourself. We want to be number one in the things we do in life. Now, how did the other 10 disciples handle this? What did the other 10 disciples think about that mother going to Jesus and requesting that for her sons? What does the Bible tell us they were thinking? Well, in the 24th verse, we read that the other 10 disciples were indignant when they heard about it. They were ticked off. They were not happy. And if we really think about it, if we were one of those other 10, if we were Philip or Peter or Andrew or John or one of the others, we probably would have been a little angry too. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the mother of those two wanted her sons to be the goats of his disciples. And in Matthew 20, verse 26, just a few verses after she makes this request, this is what we read. Jesus said this to her. It shall not be so, to the disciples, he said, this shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. So Jesus was talking before this. The verses leading up to her question and before this answer right here, Jesus was talking about how the rulers in Galilee, they loved to express and use their authority. But it's said that, and Jesus, when he's talking, he says that's exactly how you should not be. He's like, whoever is great is the servant. Now, it's like there's a war going on in our world between servanthood and self-centeredness. And sadly, self-centeredness has the upper hand in many ways. So we have to approach serving the right way. But we also need to appreciate serving the right way. Merritt points out that there really is nothing wrong with wanting to be first if you understand where first place is. Jesus said, if anyone would be first, they must be last of all and servant of all. And Merritt asked a good question here. He goes on to give the answer to it as well. He asks, do you want to be number one? He said, then here's the secret. Look for every opportunity to be number two. Now, that does not mean that if you are competing in some race or some competition or something, that you should just lose on purpose. That's not what this is really talking about. It's really just a matter of where our heart is, and do we have a servant's heart? Do we have one that is willing to not just look out for ourselves, but looking for opportunities where we can do something for others? You know, if we want to be considered great by looking at what Jesus says, we have to understand what he said. Greatness starts at the bottom. Jesus said it himself. He came to serve, not to be served. So sometimes that means we have to find the least desired position. Sometimes we have to maybe see the job that nobody else wants to do and step into that role. Merritt then mentions a little nugget, something that he had read somewhere. He couldn't remember where he came across it at, but it said this. This basic trouble in the human situation, the basic trouble in the human situation is that people wish to do as little as possible and to get as much as possible. It is only when they are filled with this desire to put into life more than they take out that life for themselves and for others will be happy and prosperous. So, here's a question. Are we seeing greatness? Greatness to Jesus has nothing to do with how much we accumulate or how much we accomplish. It comes from serving. How much and how many are we willing to serve? Can you think of a time where you gave up something or you served in some way that just made you happy, right? Typically, when we serve with the right approach, when we serve with in a way where we appreciate serving the right way, then we will leave that time of serving with a smile on our face. Listen, we can step in and do something and serve because we don't see anybody else doing it and it needs to be done. And when we do this, we can have a smile on our face and we can appreciate serving the right way, or we can be gloomy and we can just count down the minutes until it's over. And if we do that, we're serving the wrong way. See, we have to appreciate the fact that we can serve the right way. And then lastly, we need to apply serving the right way. Jesus makes it pretty clear, as Merritt says. If you want to get to the front of the line, get to the back of the line first. Look for opportunity to serve. I think many of the people here at Double Creek have been serving for years here. And I think many others have just sat back and watched it happen. And that's kind of common in a lot of churches. And I get it to an extent, because sometimes people don't want to step on someone else's toes and start doing something that someone else has been doing. But serving is something that we must do as Christians. It's not an option. We simply cannot be a Christian if we aren't serving. Jesus makes it clear that we need to serve. And serving does not have to be just here at our local congregation. It can and it should be outside the walls of the church. But for us at Double Creek, what are some of the ways that we try to get people involved in serving? Well, we have things like our Easter celebration, where we have people volunteer to help and serve. That's great. We have something usually for our out of school and back to school for our kids, where some of our adults get here and help out, and that's great. We have Vacation Bible School, where people come together, they volunteer their time, and they serve. We might have a fall activity where people get together and serve. We have our Christmas drive-thru, where so many people stepped in and volunteered and served. We have other ways as well where people can serve. But those are just some of the events where many people can serve at one time or another. If you've not served in any way in many of those, find a way to serve. Find a way to be a part of. Find a way to help out, to see so you know what's going on as well. You can be a greeter at a door. You can help someone up the stairs. You can fix communion, teach classes. You can help with nursery. You can help with children's church. There's a lot of different ways that we can serve here. And not everybody's fit for the same type of service. But know this. When you see someone else serving, you're seeing greatness in the way Jesus saw greatness. Can you see greatness around you? Do you see great ones around you here? I see many great ones here at this church. All because Jesus set the standard for greatness by serving. I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this midweek with Double Creek. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Once again, we've only got 7 weeks left in these 52 weeks. Stay safe, and God bless.